Hey guys, let's check out this macro slow motion splash kind of effect. It's been done with the pop fluid, and it's interesting because you get shapes that you don't really get with other solvers, like with Flip, for example, that we usually do water with. So you get these tendrils, sheets, interesting shapes. So the setup has the dynamics part, and before that there is some setup, emission and collision, and afterwards some surfacing. So let's go into the setup first, the emission and the collision. Everything starts with the box, and I'm trying to keep the whole thing quite procedural, so when I want to change the sizes, for example, I can do this as easily as possible, and all the changes propagate. For example, here when I do the points from volume after this initial box, I am broadcasting this parameter everywhere else where I need something that is relevant to that. So I'm using it here for the vertical size because it's quite handy to be able to say how many kind of cells, how many points thick you want uh, the tank to be. And now the pop fluid is not using voxels to simulate. It's using just the points and the distances between them, but it's still very useful to think in the whole thing as cells, because you still have distances around the points, and spacing out the points kind of regularly does help that you avoid any explosions or stuff like that. Okay, so a simple box for the kind of emission, and then points from volume are creating this main pool. I get the bounding box of the meter, and I scale it down and move it up, so it always sits above the pool. These points from volume is referenced from this one because I don't really want any different settings. I just want to have this in a separate thread here, stream, just so I can give these points some velocity downwards, because this is going to be the thing which is going to be shooting downwards. And then when I merge, these guys are not going to have this V attribute, and they're just going to have the value for this attribute at 0. Something which is happening on this other side is the friction mask that I mentioned for the edges, because I want to keep these edges not moving. You can see how it works there. The edge stays still. So I'm making a mask for friction that is keeping them still, and that's happening on the edges. I just remove the top part of that box and I extrude, so I get this kind of container to the sides with an open top. And doing VDB from Polis, getting a fog VDB is gonna enable me to use it as a mask. I just give these guys a rest frame if I need to do something that is kind of like moving stuff with the particles color, for example, and then I move into the DOP network. Now here I have collision object and pop objects. I use all the points from the emitter, and I only activate in the beginning. That's very simple, kind of basically the most simple activation you could have. I use the inherited velocity from the drop, and I multiply it by something, just because I have it as 1 in the SOP, and here I just go and multiply. So if I go like much higher, the whole thing would explode, as long as I recalculate, of course. And going lower is going to produce a smaller splash, and so on. So To apply this drag mask on the edges that I mentioned, I first get an attribute from that volume. So here is the path to the volume, the name of the volume, and the name of the attribute that this is going to produce. And because it's a fog volume, it's going to have values that range usually between 0 and 1. So that's what I do, single float attribute. And then when I do the drag, high drag, I have a group that is referring to this attribute. So whenever this attribute is above 0, basically it's inside that mask. The point is inside that mask volume. The high drag is getting applied. There is a node here which is calculating speed from the length of the velocity. That's something that I use quite often. And gravity, which is quite low because, you know, micro kind of effect and so on. You need gravity to be quite low. There is a bounding box which is killing the points. This is derived from the original base box. Just increased a little bit on the X and Y because I don't want to cut them off here on the side. And let's see how the whole thing works. So eventually it's all about that pop fluid node. Now the important stuff here is basically tensile radius and tensile strength. The tensile forces is what is keeping the particles together and pushing them away. So one force is pulling the particles and the other one is pushing them. And the radius is basically where these two, like the distance from the center of the point, where these two equalize. So get closer than this radius, and then you get repulsive, and farther you get attractive. And the amount of that strength is allowing you to create different looks for this splash, along with the constraint stiffness. Now, because this is point-based solver, it's very important how many substeps you use. So the more substeps you have, the more structures you're going to be seeing in the effect, which is cool, you know, nice to have a lot of substeps usually. It's handy to test with a smaller amount, and then when you move on to higher resolutions, when you have tuned it to relatively where you want to go, and you can then go and increase the steps, so you can get much nicer, more of what you like, basically. Decreasing the stiffness or the tensile strength is gonna reduce the occurrence of these sheets. So basically, less stiffness is gonna just enable these droplets and like these groups to break off from the sheet much sooner. So you're not gonna get as many of them. You can see that there is much more of these isolated islands broken off from here, and less tensile strength would enable these sheets to rupture faster, so you would not get them to hold on as much as we had before. So you can see how here you get the cells forming much earlier. Okay, so yeah, you tune this to your liking, and then that's basically it. I just have the pop color from the speed that I produced earlier. So this is the pop simulation. Now we can move on to the surfacing, and the way this works is that from points to meshes that you would render, I usually go through some VDB SDFs. So create my VDB first, the distance field, and the way that I do this is that I also connect to the particle separation. So when I change the resolution, these things would still be relevant. And I use a small minimum radius, just because when you do these distance fields, you always are on the edge of on one side having enough smoothness, on the other side having enough resolution. So it is always going to inflate your points. That's the nature of it. This is getting mitigated afterwards, but yeah, they're going to get inflated a little bit. And if you want to reduce this inflation, you increase the resolution of the VDB, and if you want to smoothen it, you increase the particle size. Now you need to be careful about uh, how big of a resolution you need for your chosen particle size. So if I have chosen this to be my particle size and I'm comfortable with this thickness of the particles, I can just go on and increase that, decrease actually that resolution until it's reasonable, you know, until the shapes that I see still, stop holding up and go back a little bit from there. So smoothing is good afterwards, just because it gets rid of some of these bumpiness and some of the pointy character of the points, and it helps you in sharpening your features, because always, you know, if you want to get sharp features, then you go really high into the resolution, which makes things slow. So if you can get sharper features using the smooth and the erode in here, this really helps out a lot. So that's what I usually do. I try to be conservative with the resolution and smooth and erode afterwards, just and look at the result like that, and try to make the most efficient use of my oxels. Now this is basically kind of it. That's a lower resolution than what I had in the start when I showed, but you know, anyway. So now the other important part is that you need to stitch this surface to another surface which will be broader. Unless you are framing your shot like this, which is not impossible, but even then some of it is left on the side. Now to be able to stitch this other surface, I have merged in both the original box that I emitted stuff from and another box which is called static, which is much wider. So I'm using again VDB operations to pull this off. So distance fields from both of these guys, but I have shrunk this one a little bit. You'll see a little why afterwards, and then I combine them using the difference. So I just dig out a hole in this big static field, and then I VDB combine with the simulation. So basically the hole is going to be where the tank was, and the rest is going to be the static one. Now the great thing about the VDB operations is that you can do these kind of things and you can combine smoothly. So this shrinking here, if I bypass that, you see that I'm gonna have a little bit of an edge on the sides, but if I shrink that, edge is disappearing. So eventually it just gives me some kind of overlap between these, so when I merge they would be smoother. Now resolution wise, I have messed things up a little bit, but hey, it's faster. I don't really feel like waiting for this or finding my previous sequences, so let's just move forward. Now that you have combined your distance fields, it's time to convert the whole thing to a mesh, and polygon soups are really great for that because they are very compact in their footprint, so it's good for rendering. Some adaptivity also helps, so you don't get uniformly dense polygons, especially away from any detail, which is the case with the smooth surface, and you just cache it out. So if I come here and I preview my original result, that's basically how it looks. There's still some things that can be tweaked, but case study is really good enough. Of course, it's good to know that you can retime that, and slowing it down would be a little bit more sensitive, but you can easily speed it up. So I just use that to find the speed I like. And you can see, yay, nice shapes. stuff is good. Okay, so yeah, not very complicated effect to get and very interesting shapes. Hope you liked it and see you next time.